Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Pardon Well podcast. I'm your host, film critic David Lilly. This week, I'm going to be doing a pop art review, as you know in the title. We're going to be covering Loki season 2, which I'm super excited about. I'm going to tell you about all the things I loved about that season, along with the season before, and how it all ties in. And cover all the stuff that I normally cover. I don't do the crazy breakdowns and then all the Easter eggs. I mean, I'll talk about those sometimes, but most of the time I focus on the storytelling of it and the artistic renderings of stuff, all the fancy schmancy boring stuff. That's the thing I like to talk about, and why I think certain things are successful and certain things aren't, and we're going to get into that today as well, and bring up the Marvels and Echo that's coming out, and I'm going to tell you what my thoughts are for the MCU going forward. But before I do, if you noticed, I'm wearing this pretty awesome t-shirt. It's Throg. It's my own design. I made it. And if you like this shirt and you're like, man, I really wish I had one of those, you can go to pardonwillmerch.com. And there you'll see the design, and you can check it out and choose colors and different sizes and order one of your own. And it helps support the podcast. And because I appreciate you watching this and I want you to have sweet merch like I'm wearing, use promo code podcast, get 15% off. That's like 95% of my profits. So that's to, I love you guys. Not even trying to make money off y'all. Just want you to have pretty awesome merch. You can also like and subscribe this video. And if you want, type a comment. Maybe I'll read it on, if it's a cool comment like, hi mom, and this podcast sucks, I'll read that on air, on the next episode and stuff like that. So anyway, let's get into it. I'm hoping this is going to be somewhat of a short episode. I don't think I'm going to go super long into any crazy rants. But that's probably a lie. I'm probably going to rant quite a bit. But let's start off with the things that I loved the most about this. Actually, I'm just going to be flat out honest. I love the whole thing. The whole thing was great. I don't think I have much of a complaint at all. And normally I have at least one complaint. But this series, the season 1 and season 2 really delivered all the stuff that I really appreciate about the Marvel universe and the storytelling aspect, and especially the artistic stuff. So I said this before, and I think when I reviewed Loki this first season, and when I did a recap coming up, when I started off with episode 1 of season 2, I mentioned this, but the music in this whole series is great, and especially the theme. And I'm going to bring this up later when I talk about the ending. The theme is still one of my favorite themes of all time, mostly because it's notable. Now, if you go back and watch like all the series that have come out, before this, even like not even the MCU, like Star Wars, the Ahsoka, the themes aren't noticeable at all. Like when they run the credits and here's Ahsoka, none of that stuff really, hangs out with you, except for maybe the Mandalorian theme. That one, and that'll come up again too. And that theme was pretty awesome. And these are themes like if you heard them out and like you're in the mall and you heard this music, you'd be like, oh my god, that's Loki. But a lot of the other shows, a lot of the other MCUs, each character superhero has like a superhero theme. They're not super noticeable, but this Loki one, it is, and I think it's going to play a big part later on. But the music and then the score, I mean, bringing in the very last episode. Oh, spoiler alerts, by the way. If you're watching this and you're like, I hope he doesn't spoil it. I'm totally going to spoil this stuff. Matter of fact, I'm going to talk a lot about the ending. So if you haven't seen Loki, the last episode, probably should not be listening to me right now. So the where was I? The music. Was I talking about the music? Oh yeah, Beethoven's Fifth was brought in this last episode, and I thought that was pretty cool. Um, kind of, kind of like a kind of a I almost said a throwaway, but no, I think the soundtrack is really awesome. I think I'm trying to remember what episode it was where Sylvie's in the record shop, and the way they did the music was pretty awesome. But I wanted to just mention that, but really the theme I think is the most important. All right. As far as artistic rendering, like the visuals, this one I try to think about Loki versus all the other MCU, especially when you get into like planets and stuff like that. And the one I really picked up on was Ant-Man, because when I reviewed Ant-Man and Quantumania, I kind of threw it under the bus a little bit about it, kind of oversaturating, too many visuals. It was kind of clustered. You didn't really, yeah, it was fun, but there wasn't anything super important about it. Matter of fact, it got overwhelming to the point where you're like not impressed. Um, I think Loki did it great, and I don't know if that's just because it's juxtaposed with that weird 70s bureaucracy office building feel, which I'm sure it is. But even when they went to other places like planets in season one, or even when they were on Earth in this season at the McDonald's and stuff like that, you can tell they put a lot of attention into detail. Probably wasn't cheap. And while it would have been like, did you really have to go to a McDonald's and spend all that money and trying to get this 70s feel? I think it was worth it. Even the 1800s when they went to visit Victor Timely, I thought that these were fun places. They felt fun. They felt serious fun. Not like they just felt like a good timepiece. Like you actually were there. They didn't cheapen it out, especially the World's Fair when they were in Chicago, and just seeing like the fair whole concept and people running. I love that. I thought they did a great job with that. Especially if you're going to have a whole series about time travel and going to different places. That's one of the things you really can't mess up. And I think they did a great job with that. Uh, One of the things that I think the MCU does focus on a lot is uh is CGIing characters, because you have aliens and you have all these elaborate costumes. And Loki didn't have to do that a lot, and so it stuck with kind of a dry feel to the costumes, and there's no aliens for the most part. And other than like missed minutes, there's really nothing outside of just the scenery that they can focus on. And that might actually helped with making these things stand out, like the McDonald's or the 1800s, World's Fair, or even the very last episode, or even in the last episode in season one, where you're at the end of time and that the timelines and stuff. They really got the chance to hone in on that. But there was a few things that I really enjoyed. Um, Other than like the vines at the end where Loki's grabbing him, or him walking down the platform and like his jacket like being blown off and disintegrating, and his new costume coming in. That was amazing. I love that stuff. But you can really pay attention to those things when it's honed in on. There's not a lot going on, and so this is the thing that you're focused on. And I thought that was pretty rad. And there's one other part that I thought was interesting, is at the end, the very last episode, of season two, where Mobius and Sylvie are talking, and they're right outside Mobius's house on Earth. Um, it's it's weird that they did this shot of Mobius through a light glare. Like it seems like you're looking at the sun with him in front of it. In the colors, green and gold, I get that, but it was just a weird, interesting take. Kind of felt like a sunsetting feel, and the whole series is a sunsetting feel. Um, in that it's, I think, see, this is what I'm talking about when it's artistically done to portray a feeling. Because the whole series, and my wife pointed this out, she was like, I liked the ending, but it didn't seem like it wasn't like it wasn't as exciting as you feel like an ending would be. It kind of felt like a sunset where it was pretty, but it was also ending. And I think that was on purpose to kind of close this chapter of a book, of the whole book. Because even I think the directors or the writers were talking about season one, season two were just two volumes in one single book. So they're really just kind of shutting the door on this entire storyline. And I think they did a great job of that, because even this last episode, the season finale, it kind of landed the plane softly, and somberly, and that visual feel to it, it didn't really climax. It kind of hit the top, and then glided down into kind of a just a good bookend, is what I think I'm trying to say. But enough about that. Let's get into the storytelling aspect of the episode. Anyway, so either way, I like the music, I like the art. I think these are probably one of the better MCUs that have done the visual rendering and how to take the visuals and make you feel what's going on. Oh, one other thing that I think Loki does better than any of the other movies is even when there's no dialogue, the facial expressions, you can tell that they paid a lot of attention to, like, especially this, like zooming in on Loki's face in certain aspects when he's about to walk down the platform, or when Victor Timely like disappears, and whenever the world's ending at the episode five, him like tearing up. You can kind of see that they did a really good job. And I know that's most likely the actors and what they're capable of, but spending a lot more time on facial expressions than just straight dialogue. Uh, I think they did a great job with that, which can't be too easy to do. But storytelling, one of the things I liked about this series, the season one, season two, and I don't know, I mean, sometimes they do this, but it was a bit of a heady theme, the time travel theme. Um, kind of making mistakes and how to correct mistakes and how does time work. And I think it was kind of heady, especially when we get into time travel and like how does this thing, if you go back in time and time slipping outside of time, these things can be a little confusing. And I think they leaned into that. Uh, and I think if you really hone into that heady theme, being like, I don't understand, because even at the end of the episode, it was a bit confused. Like, what is actually happening here? And from episode one to like season one was that there was some mystery to it, but you kind of got the idea. Even at the very end, where he's, he who remains was explaining that, he created the TVA to keep all the other Kang variants, pruning those timelines so they don't come through. That was all pretty solid. Like I don't think that was difficult to understand. But this one starting off, episode one was kind of confusing. And throughout the whole season was confusing because you're not really sure exactly where they're going. And I think the characters went along that ride with you. I mean, you can kind of tell that Loki didn't really know exactly what was happening. He was just trying to figure out it in real time with you. So you're along for the ride. I think where most movies, when they get confusing, I think the problem they run into is they're not confused. The directors aren't confused. They just didn't realize that you would be as a viewer. Um, and so it's one of those. Well, of course, why wouldn't they assume that what we're trying to do here? And a lot of times, I think there's a disconnect. But in Loki, I don't think they did that. I think they left you wondering exactly what's going on through each episode, along with the characters. So that was pretty cool. I did like, this is why I think the Loki season, because it's such a heady concept, a philosophical concept, almost similar to the quantum realm in Ant-Man. Like, so that's a bit of a heady concept as well. And I think they did it well with Ant-Man explaining exactly like going smaller and smaller into atoms and there being universes inside the universe that we live in. I think they did a good job with that. I think Loki does a good job with explaining time, but also leaving a mystery to it. How to be outside of time and still time slip. Um, how to travel back and forth outside of time while having its own timeline is it's a bit of a catch-22 conundrum. And I think they left the mystery there to kind of lead you along. And you have to just sustain your disbelief for a little bit to kind of follow with it. But the storytelling of it, outside the headiness of time travel and all that, the storytelling I thought was pretty awesome. And there's a few arcs that I wanted to talk about. Um, let's bring up. I think having the first episode in season one being Glorious Purpose, and the last episode being titled Glorious Purpose, and then the episode one of season two called Ouroboros, which is the snake eating its own tail. I thought that was a pretty cool take of the circular motion, because the whole episode is about like it's how time just circulates back and over again. Um, that was pretty rad. And you're gonna and the story arcs are a bit of the same thing too. That's why I want to mention that before I get into story arcs. The first story arc, which I thought was pretty neat, because if you think about it, this Loki in Loki season has its own story arc, while the Loki in the regular MCU reality has his own story arc. And they're kind of different, but they end up in the same spot. And so the first, we're actually following a story arc of a character we've already seen before, but this one goes in way more depth to kind of discover who Loki is. While as in the normal MCU, where you have the Battle of New York, and then you have all the Thor movies and Thor Ragnarok, and then all the way to where Loki gets killed by Thanos at the end, and he's a bit of a hero or an anti-hero at that point, but he chooses the right thing. That was a pretty cool story arc, but now with this Loki, we get to see a more in-depth version of it, and I think it builds that character to be a little bit more complicated and a little bit more powerful. And so, and this is where I'm going, the story arc. So this is the first one that I really thought was neat. So in the Battle of New York, that the first Avengers movie, where Loki appears on the scene, right? And he's in Germany, and he's standing above the people, and he's basically saying that I'm going to rule over Earth, all the masses of the Earth, because free will is a burden on you, and I'm going to take up that burden, and I'm going to subjugate you, because all of you want to be controlled. That was his big thing. Like, I'm here to be your king, to control you, because that making choices, that's a hard life to live. So I'm going to make the choices for you, and you're going to be my subjects. So eradicating free will as he sits on the throne over Earth. And then throughout this entire story arc, at the very end, he sits on a throne, but he's protecting free will in a juxtaposition. So instead of the whole thing at the beginning being like, I want to subjugate and control people, the whole last season of Loki, he's trying to figure out a way to reinstate free will of all these multiple branches. Instead of the way like the He Who Remains was like, nope, all this other branches spawning off these people's lives, like Sylvie and Mobius and all these variants, got to nip that because there's one timeline and it has to go this way. Um, the whole point of which would have been a very big Loki thing, like I need to control this, I need to make sure free will stays out of this, and all these other branches. The whole theme of Loki was trying to keep free will existing, and still have the all the timelines exist without them exploding in on each other, but also to keep free will upheld. And so I thought that was a pretty cool arc. So now he sits on a throne, not like the one he wanted to. Um, he sits on a throne protecting free will and multiple, all the branches and his friends. So that was a pretty cool arc. One of the big story themes of this character Loki, and you saw this, I think in episode 1 of season 1, where Loki gets pulled in, to sit down with Mobius, and they're going over Loki's life that he hasn't lived yet. So he's going through and watching it. Um, and basically, in that whole storytelling, it's Mobius shows him all the Avengers. It's basically because he's talking about his glorious purpose, and Mobius is like, no, your purpose is to lose and to unite all the heroes. Like your purpose is to be the footstool for all the other people's purpose. And at that time, like Loki's, I mean, it's devastating to him. He thinks he's gonna, rule Earth, and his big glorious purpose is up here to be the king of Asgard, and then that doesn't work. So king of Earth, and eventually that doesn't work. And then I think in that first season, you start to wonder if he's trying to become the king of the TVA, because you have to remember he's a villain in the beginning of season 1. Um, but his whole glorious purpose was to be a footnote for everyone else's glorious purpose, and that's devastating to him. But by the end of season 2, you find out, like, even when he's talking to Sylvie at the bar, she's like, "What do you want?" And he's like, "I want to restore the TVA." And she's like, "No, that's not. What do you want?" And he was like, "I just want to save my friends." Which is totally different than villain Loki at the beginning, where he's trying to rule over everyone, and then to see it at the very end, all the way down when he becomes the king of the timeline. Basically, his whole glorious purpose is basically to keep everyone else's purpose going. And I was like, it's the same purpose as it was in the beginning, where he's the footstool or the footnote to everyone else's glory, all their glorious purposes. Now he's still that. He's still the footstool. He's holding together everyone else's glorious purpose, and he's not letting the timeline extinguish all these branches. Mobius gets to go back home and live as a father for his kids. That's Mobius's glorious purpose, and all these other people who their existence was going to ruin the timelines and let Kangs come through, so they can't have their purpose. Loki's there to protect it. So he's still the footnote for everyone else, but he's voluntary. He does it because not out of spite, not out of like bad luck, or because like because he is a footstool of it, but he voluntarily sacrifices his own like what he wants, to make sure everybody else has a purpose in that. And you can spend some time on that purpose thing. I think of my last episode where I was talking to Michael about purpose, and how it's a difficult thing in our culture where there's a lot of listless people and they don't feel like there's a purpose in life for them, and that causes them to do horrific things or waste away. And I think purpose is a big thing for people in our culture, because of things like the internet. Like it's to have a purpose, to be just ordinary and just be like a normal person doesn't feel glorious anymore. When the truth is, like even in Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf talks about, it's the little people doing ordinary things that keeps the evil at bay. I think people forget about that. And I think everybody wants to be famous, and everybody wants to be rich, and everyone wants to rule. Everybody wants to get to the top. I think people forget about the real importance of what purpose is. And so they start to look for their glorious purpose. But really, I mean, even in the Loki series, it touches down into that glorious purpose. It's not glorious. It's a burden. And sometimes people's purposes are they are a burden, but they're a glorious one because if you're a parent, your whole thing is to protect and raise children so that they can live on for their glorious purpose, probably to do the same, to continue society. Everything that we do in our careers and our works, like you might not be the most famous person, but what you do, there's a purpose to that to continue to build on, and to leave a legacy for the next generations or whatever that is. Those small purposes is pretty much shown in this Loki series, where his glorious purpose is to hold up everyone else's purpose. And that is where it feels like a burden, which it is. It's pretty glorious in the same aspect. So that's another thing about this storytelling of his arc. Might be one of the best story arcs in the MCU, because of how in depth and relatable that is. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit. But I want to talk about one more story arc that I thought was pretty crazy, because all of these seem to be where he started. He ends up at the end. And here's one big one. So the first season, I think I talked about this in a previous review. It seemed like the thing that Loki was fighting off was being alone. That's why Sylvie came in, and he builds this relationship with it. Just it's a bit of a narcissistic concept where it's another variant of him. But you can tell he doesn't want. He keeps Mobius puts him in that weird time loop where he keeps going through the same event where what's her face shows up and slaps him and basically tells him you're going to be alone forever. You can tell this is a problem for him. This is horrific. And to be honest, being alone is, out of all the suffering sucks and burdens suck and suffering sucks. That's a weird understatement. I've said this before, I think, on a podcast. It's because I read a few books about monastic belief in suffering. And Thomas Merton talks about suffering. And he says, to just suffering for a meaningless cause is pretty bad. And he goes, suffering doesn't always have to be bad. It can be made holy, but it has to be made holy for a greater meaning. Like you can't just to suffer, even just to suffer for pity's sake, is a weird temptation that people fall into, because suffering's going to happen. We're all going to deal with things. He goes, but to deal with things with a meaning behind it makes that suffering worthwhile. It makes it actually something good instead of it being just a burden alone. And this is a weird time, but in the Loki series, he is the footstool. He's suffering. He keeps, even the Sylvie brings up or Loki's born to lose, and they might have been, or at least a footstool for everyone else's. But the worst part of that losing is Loki seemed to be born to be alone. And then when they go into the end of the time where all the variants of Lokis are, none of them can really. I mean, they can't even team up because they're all so out for their own thing. All the variants, well, what Goliath is going through eating stuff. They're all these variants are in this end of time, planet, and they're fighting with each other because they can't come together. And I thought that was a great thing. Lokis are destined to be alone because they can't seem to connect. But this variant of Loki does. He makes friends, right? And so that's his big purpose. His mission is to make sure is to be with his friends and his friends survive. And then at the very end, he sacrifices that to be alone. So he ends up exactly where he starts, but in a meaningful way. And so I love this series because it takes all these different ideas of burden and purpose and shows it he's the same guy. His purpose was the same in the beginning, but it's different now because it's meaningful. And he sees that, and it makes his world complete. So I thought, as far as life lessons with this Loki series, bad things are going to happen, and suffering happens, and life is difficult, but it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be meaningless with that difficulty, because we always try to eradicate suffering. Like one of the big things with being a person is trying to mitigate how difficult the world can be, and people are always trying to do that, and that's a big it's a big avenue to try to seek after. I mean, everybody does this. We're trying to avoid problems and trying to avoid making life worse, or at least dealing with that. But really what we should be avoiding is, because that's going to happen. Like bad things are going to happen. We should just make sure whatever we do has meaning in it. and it's a meaning that we can find and hold on to. Um, that's that Thomas Merton thing. That's suffering, especially suffering alone. I can go into a whole Jesus analogy and bring theology into it. Maybe I'll do that in another episode, but I just want to talk about that. And I want to talk about where the MCU is going to go from there. So anyway, if you haven't figured out yet, Loki might be one of my favorite MCU series, one of my favorite series out of all television, because of how in depth and how crazy good that storyline is. Um, of this character arc. It's one that you don't see very often, or at least I haven't paid attention to, and this one does a great job with it. But so I'm gonna be honest, as far as MCU goes, Loki's gonna be pretty high up on that list. Now I have nostalgic ones like, Iron Man 1 and Doctor Strange and Thor Ragnarok. These are ones that I enjoy. I think the storylines are great, but Loki, to go into that depth of storyline and story arc and to pull it off the way they did, it moves Loki the whole season, the whole series, pretty high on my favorite MCU list. Um, and so I don't know what to do with that, because now that they've done Loki, anything they do after it, it's going to be difficult to match up. Speaking of which, they end Loki, and then the Marvels came out this weekend. Now, all all my uh, premonitions aside, I wasn't sure if I was even going to go see the Marvels in theater for a few reasons. Just not super appealing, and I'm going to tell you why I wasn't really super. Look, we all know the internet exists, and if you go on the internet and be like, "Hey, Marvels is coming out," if you read the comments, there's a lot of majority of people being like, "I don't want to go see this. Like, this doesn't look any good." And now most people are just, well, it's a bunch of white male misogynists out there being like, "You ruined my comic books." Sure, I mean, maybe that may I'm guarantee there's probably some of those out there. Um, but I can tell you exactly the reasons why some of these series, like I watched Miss Marvel. I obviously I liked WandaVision. I liked all these other shows for very specific reasons, because I like character building. I like the idea of these dynamic characters. I didn't like Captain America. I went and saw Captain America in theaters, and I didn't like it coming out. I like some things about it. Um, I didn't really bump up against with the Brie Larson, like a lot of people were like, "Oh, she's a terrible actor." I didn't really bump up against that. I feel bad because I think they wrote her character wrong. They could have done a lot better with her, but they made her smug, and they made her unlikable. She's arrogant right off the bat. Um, but one of the thing I really don't like about Captain Marvel is the same reason I don't like Superman. Um, I hate this overarching, ultra powerful, nebulous idea of what are her powers. She's powerful. She can, fly through spaceships and blow up. She's just pure energy. What is this? Like, what is? I hate this concept. At least with like Tony Stark, like, well, he's smart. He knows how to work machines, and he struggles with being a megalomaniac. And Captain America, like he's a wimp, but then he gets superpower. Like, what these people's superpowers are. Black Panther, you know what his superpower. Black Widow, you know what her superpower is. Not only is she like a crazy ninja and spy, she's extremely smart and knows how to manipulate and work around people. These are like definable superpowers. Captain Marvel, I'm not really sure what what is it. She got hit with the time, or she got hit with an Infinity Stone. Now she's just power in general. I think they screwed that up. I mean, maybe that's a comic book thing. Sure, I'm not super in. I like comic books. I didn't read them all. You guys know that. I'm not like, this is issue whatever. And I don't like Superman for that reason. Like, his powers, that doesn't tell a story. I mean, Superman kind of does, but I hate his powers. And I specifically hate Captain Marvel's powers because I think they did the girl wrong by just not explaining what they are. And then they bring in Photon, Monica Rambeau in WandaVision. Not really sure what that is either. What are her powers? And then even in the trailer, she can't fly, and Samuel L. Jackson's like, use black girl magic, and then she flies. Like, I haven't seen the movie, by the way. I haven't seen Marvels. I'm gonna watch it when it comes on Disney Plus. I'm probably not gonna go to the theaters, and I'll tell you the reason why for that too. Um, but what are her powers? And then you get to like maybe Miss Marvel, the teenage girl. you kind of understand she can manipulate light, I think. I don't even know if she knows what her powers are. So let's take the three people. We don't understand them at all. I mean, even like let's be honest, Loki. I think I know his power. He's master of illusion, right? But he can make things appear and disappear in reality. I think that's his powers. But there were some points in time where like he can use telekinesis and hold up buildings that are falling. That I bumped up against that because I was like, I don't understand. When did this power happen? Sometimes the Loki thing throws me off, but at least I can kind of pinpoint it. These others I don't know. And I think when you build characters who are like, well, they're just powerful, deal with it. And like, no, that's not good enough for me. Like, at least make them relatable in some form or fashion. And that gets to the idea why I'm probably not going to go see this in theaters. Because there's a lot of Marvel movies I just wait for Disney Plus to come out on. This one's going to be one because I don't relate. And when I talked to Jeff, the guy on, I had a few episodes back, and he was like, "Well, his explanation was, "Dude, they're not made for you." And fair, like I understand. Like I watched the Miss Marvel series on Disney Plus. I easily tell that wasn't made for me. I mean, it's made for teenagers. I get it. No, I enjoyed it. It wasn't so. It was pretty cool storytelling, but it wasn't made for me. I wasn't going to sit down and do a review and be like, why aren't there more? Whatever I want, give me Captain America, whatever. It wasn't made for me. And this movie, this the Marvels, you could tell it wasn't made for me. It's I mean, the defeating the patriarchy aside, which we saw with the whole Captain Marvel thing in the beginning, I thought was a terrible storyline. Not because I am a part of the patriarchy, because it's not relatable. It's just not relatable, and they wrote the character terrible. You could tell that they were just pandering, and that's what the whole Marvels thing feels like with the trailer. And this is why shame, shame, shame on them for cheap shotting the trailers. Before this movie came out, like 2 days before, they dropped a trailer for the Marvels, and the whole intro was Captain America and Iron Man, and they were trying to pull that nostalgia, like, "Remember your characters you like? This is gonna be like, that's a cheap shot. Even if you would've left that out, I would've been more likely to go and see it, but when you start pandering like that, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of the I'm not an idiot. Like, I know you think all of your viewers are dumb, or at least maybe you can scoop up the dumb ones by being like, maybe there's a Iron Man cameo. No, I'm not an idiot. That was a cheap shot, and I would have been more likely to go see this in theaters. How do you not start pulling at straws and being like, what do our fans love? Well, they obviously don't like this weird feminist stuff. Throw Captain America in there and Iron Man, in a flashback. Maybe that'll get them to go see our crappy movie. Like I don't and to be honest, I've watched some of the reviews of it, and people are like, "Actually, it was better than I thought it was gonna be." That was more intriguing of being like, "Oh, see, I would've went and watched it just because at least there might be some cool stuff in it." But the trailers ruined it, man. Like, let's talk about a few things in the trailers that I didn't like. The flashback scene, the Iron Man and Captain America, like, you didn't need that. That was a weird pandering thing. That just seems weird. The villain in it just seems like a villain we've already had just in female form. I mean, she's carrying the same hammer, you know, and then it's like, we're gonna open up worlds and then armies are gonna fly. I've seen this before. Like, are you just regurgitating things that have happened in 2012 Army in New York? Well, what is this? Like, this doesn't even seem. I don't even understand why I would. Are we just rewatching old? Are you just rewatching old movies? That's one. And then if you, this is one I saw on a lot, was the black girl magic comment that Samuel L. Jackson. Okay, sure. It's a pandering. It's pandering for a demographic that I'm not, which is cool. Like, okay, but man, why would you put that? Like, I understand putting that in the movie. Hurrah! Why would you put that in the trailer? Like, are you trying to keep people who are like, people? This movie might not be made for me, but maybe I'll like it. Are you just trying to kick them out of the theater and be like, no, no, we want to make sure to turn off a ton of our audience by pandering to one particular sect. Maybe I'm biased in this because I'm a white male or whatever, but I like Monica Rambeau. I think out of all three of the Marvels, she's the coolest one. The Marvels. I like her way better. And WandaVision, I thought her character was great. I would watch a Monica Rambeau standalone. They didn't even give her that. They're like, let's just throw her in with all this other girl power, garbage, and hopefully she doesn't get drowned out. You could have done her storyline was far better than any of the others. Um, I would have watched a standalone with that. But anyway, the whole pandering thing, they lost me. And maybe I judge these things too harshly when it comes to things that I'm like, well, it's not Spider-Man or it's not Batman or whatever. Sure, I'm allowed to. And maybe I'm missing out. Maybe I should have went and saw it in theaters. Maybe I'm missing out on the whole thing. But that pandering thing, let's talk about one other pandering thing that didn't work. Um, you could have said, truthfully, you could have said Black Panther was a pandering to the black community, maybe, but the storyline's so damn good that I went and saw it, and I loved it, and I connected with it. And this is what I'm talking about with the MCU. When you write good stories like Loki, see the cool thing about Loki is sure it's a male misogynist, feat for power, but it wasn't. It was an idea about purpose. And everyone deals with that. Everyone struggles with the idea of purpose. It's a universal storyline that we all go through. And you didn't have to pander to one. You have Sylvie there as a giant main character, and she's powerful, she's clever, and she's likable. This is how you do storytelling. You don't have to just veer into one alley and be like, "This is the lane we're in. Fight the patriarchy." You're alienating so many people because it's not a relatable storyline to a large audience. If you stuck with the things that connect to the soul and not just to superficial things. I mean, sure, no, maybe the superficial, I'm wrong. Maybe people are like, I really just needed, this thing to speak to me. I'm wherever I am. I'm, a young, like Miss Marvel, like I'm a young teenager girl in New York or New Jersey or whatever. And this show really spoke to me. Awesome. And it did its job. Um, Loki, I don't know who I don't know who's out there right now being like, I'm a, an Asgardian god and sure I'm getting a hard break. I wonder if they're gonna make a movie about something I can relate to. No, it was a story about being misguided, not having a purpose, trying to find your way in the world and it not being what you think it is. Like these things are universally relatable. And I think that's where good storytelling comes. And it's not so much of a pandering issue. You're not pandering to one particular part of the community or the MCU community or one particular pandering part of the audience. You're speaking to the soul of humanity, things that a lot of people deal with. So that's my idea. That's why I mean, I might go see Marvels in the theater. I'm going to wait a little bit. We'll see. I was just going to wait for it to come on Disney Plus because it just didn't seem like it was something up my alley. Like I wasn't like, oh, super excited. And the fact that they didn't even put a here's the thing, I would have went and watched it had I known, like, not known what the post-credit scene is. But even Marvel's been messing the post-credit scenes up. Do you guys remember Shang-Chi's post-credit scene? Where, I don't know if you haven't seen Shang-Chi, but at the very end, they're analyzing the bracelets, right? And they're like, it's a signal coming from somewhere else. This was, like, years ago, right? We haven't heard anything from that since. Like, we haven't they're not tying anything together. Even the multiverse, when we're like, "No, we got Spider-Man and Tobey Maguire's in it. We're gonna get the multiverse." Didn't really tie into Doctor Strange, and he went to the multiverse. That didn't really make tie in. And all of a sudden, we're starting to tie in Loki with Ant-Man and Quantumania, finally. But then they come out with the post-credit scene where it's like more multiverse. It just doesn't I started to not even care about the post-credit scenes because they weren't leading it's supposed to be like a cliffhanger for the next at least few things, which it probably is. But for the longest time, they kept putting these post-credit scenes out that mean nothing for the next 8 years. And then maybe we're like, oh yeah, the post-credit scene in Shang-Chi with the bracelets. Oh, okay, that makes sense a decade later. Um, so that's just another writing thing. I think they could have done better with that. So I'll probably see Marvels. I'm not going to review it. You guys already know my white male misogynist take, patriarchal take on how that stuff goes. But the other one coming out in January, Echo. I'm definitely gonna review that. And that's just because I loved Hawkeye. I love Daredevil. The Netflix series, this thing looks like it came from the Netflix series. I think it's rated MA. This is gonna be so if they were pandering to anybody, they pandered to me. Because Echo looks awesome. I love it. And there was just like this quick in the trailer. If you haven't seen, go watch it. There's this quick shot of Daredevil. That was that was just icing on the top. Like I'm just super stoked. I love the Daredevil concept. Like this whole part of the story over here with like New York and Kingpin. I'm here for it all the way. I thought Hawkeye was one of the better MCU series that they came out with. Hawkeye was chef's kiss, and I know it didn't even get a lot of recognition because it's kind of a Christmas story. I'm going to go back and rewatch it now that Christmas is around the corner because Echo's coming out, and I suggest you do the same because I'm going to review it. I know it's going to be good because you actually get character building with Echo. Like, you get a whole backstory. It's a complicated because she's technically a villain, and they're going to lean into that the way they did with Loki. This is going to be good storytelling. And so that's my thoughts on Echo. I'll review that. I also have some other episodes coming out. Some people I'm going to be interviewing that are artists as well and thinkers and stuff like that. So stay tuned. But that's my thoughts on Loki season 2. Go watch it if you haven't. If you haven't watched it and you watched this and I ruined it for you, shame on you. You should have watched it before listening to this. But anyway, thanks for watching this episode of the Pardon Will Podcast. Like and subscribe, comment, do all that stuff. You know the drill. And I'll see you guys back here next time.